Thank you, Sally. And that phrase that you were talking about, the judge a society by how many people it makes vulnerable, that lands with me, because it's things like not giving access to vaccinations and antivirals, and particularly vaccinations to children, where there's a strong argument to have protected children in the UK. I know in other countries they made different decisions, but in the UK we vaccinated almost none of the children, because even when they were offered, there'd been such a campaign to make it seem as though that was a bad idea. It was just awful. But for people who really could benefit from antivirals in the UK, I mean, it's not the same in the USA. You can be prescribed Paxlovid much more easily in the USA. I'm not saying it's easy for everybody, but in the UK, it's almost impossible.
Yeah.
But this is a choice to make people more vulnerable.
Yeah.
Because there are things we could have done, and there's still things that we can do, and we're still not doing them. But you know what really gets me at the moment is that people are talking about, oh, well, this is just a mini wave that we've got, and the prevalence is low. There's 750,000 people currently infected with COVID in the UK.
Yeah.
And if 1 in 10 of them ends up with long COVID,
yeah,
we have made a choice to make 75,000 people, more vulnerable.
Exactly.
But people are quite happy about this. It's like, yes, it's a much lower wave. This is good news. This is great. And no, it's not.
It's really not. No.
Yeah. So you were talking about the, this, how do we organize internationally and locally, and how do we do it? How do we involve all of the different groups, like people like JAMA and people from the long COVID community? How do we involve them? How do we organize and make sure nobody's left behind and everybody's included in what you're trying to do?
Well, if there was an easy answer to that, I'd give it to you. But I think it's partly about identifying areas, things to what we all have views on, perspectives on, and different perspectives. So, like, what would this is an area I'm particularly interested to do some work on. Really inclusive hybrid events look like, and what stops them happening, and maybe we sort of bring together a real diversity of people and experts who know about the technology and so on together to start talking through what that would look like, so that it's inclusive not just remotely, but also the in-person bit is as inclusive as it can be too. And how do we develop good practice around that? The things that, let's pick sort of topics, and it could be research as well. There's so much. I mean, there's so many things we could be looking at, and find ways of, it'll be setting up little, small groups maybe to operate remotely. We need so much different expertise, and differently placed people, I think, to make this work. And it's going to be it's an ongoing process. You might come up with something, but then the technology moves on, or somebody goes, hang on a minute, that doesn't work, because it's a sort of ongoing trying to get this to work as well as possible, and always being receptive to making adjustments as you learn more and more things become possible. So I think that's the kind of way of working. And it is, I think, about, as I said, it's about two-way dialogue. I mean, I certainly haven't got all the answers. I'm still, I learn all the time. I learn from everyone I talk to. I tend to come away with something I didn't know before, or a different way to think about something. And, that's kind of, I think, what we need to be, the way we need to be working. And, yes, it's about involving the people with the power to make change, as well as the people who very much need them to make that change, to really understand what the barriers are. And it is very much about supporting each other, because we do, I mean, it's so hard to kind of, I don't know, how do you go out your house and not look at people who aren't wearing masks and think, yep, there goes somebody who doesn't really care whether other people live or die. Now that isn't fair. They are hideously misinformed and have no real sense of any of this stuff, and they probably haven't got the capacity to engage with it because there's such a cost of living crisis going on. People right now, certainly in the UK, they're struggling to just find enough food for their kids. Like what they're going to eat this evening. It's the kind of immediate. It is, things are pretty desperate for an awful lot of people, and I think that is understandably, people are having to focus on the immediate, what's happening to them like now, and they can't. We all have a limited bandwidth to what we can engage with, and it's coming at us from all sides at the moment. So I'm trying to be understanding, but and people, I think there is a trauma response out there. I think everybody was traumatized by what happened, and just like if you've had a very bad experience, you don't want to be reminded of it, and I think that's a very understandable human reaction. Hugely problematic under the circumstances, but it is understandable.
But Sally, I think there are things that I see as being things we need to tackle really urgently, like masks. The lack of masks in healthcare.
Yeah.
And I see Joaquin Beltram is here, and he's in California, and he's out campaigning outside places, handing out masks to people. He's there with his banners, keep masks in healthcare.
Yeah.
And he's, a great guy. And a lot of these efforts seem fragmented, and we need somehow, to come together and demand this change. And I don't know how to do that. And I'm not saying that you have the answer, but do you have a view?
Well, we've been very actively working on this in Scotland, and it helps because it's a relatively small country, so it's easier to kind of make the networks join up, and so there's a Scottish healthcare workers coalition of healthcare workers with, I think mostly with long COVID, who wrote a letter to the First Minister, and it got picked up by the media here, and including the BBC. So all kinds of organisations. I signed it up. Other people signed it. Got a load of publicity. We've got one or two journalists who will cover stories around COVID. You can actually get some media coverage on occasions, and there's a lot. I think it's fascinating how so many little organisations have sprung up out of nowhere. How they've appeared so rapidly. A whole new sector has just mushroomed, and it's fantastic how that has happened. So it's about how to kind of give a focus to this and momentum. So there was a poll, which in fact the same paper, the Herald, which we got a lot of people signing, and it came out with something like 93% of those, over nearly 3,000 respondents, wanted action on clean air, and 80 something or another wanted masks in healthcare. So, and then that becomes a really important thing that you can start using. There are challenges too, because even if you can get media opportunities, you can't always find people for journalists to speak to. So there's a lot to do, and they pretty much always want to speak to somebody with that lived experience. So there are a lot of different angles, but also starting to think about what legal cases could be taken in connection with this masking issue, and that's where we kind of need access to legal expertise and advice, and it costs access to justice. Well, forget about that. It's really hard to get that, but there are even what about hate crime legislation? What about there's all kinds of certainly equality legislation, rights to reasonable adjustments. There's a whole lot of possible legal tools that could be deployed, and I totally agree, Pete. One of the most important thing probably now is, if we lose the argument as to why in healthcare settings of all places where people who are at high clinical risk are very often compelled to go, where the professionals have, it is their kind of the bedrock of the profession that they do no harm, yet they're refusing to wear and are being told not to wear effective PPE to keep people and themselves safe, despite the fact that, healthcare workers are amongst the top of the league for long COVID as well. So there's a workplace health and safety issue here as well. That's another legal angle to try. We've kind of lost it, because if we can't win in a healthcare setting the need to keep people safe, then how can we win it anywhere else? And I do get very angry. People talk about care, the word care. Since when did caring mean putting people at risk, avoidably at risk? It's the double think on that. It kind of does your head in somewhat.
I showed you the thread that I wrote, didn't I, about my daughter?
You did.
And she, like many others who replied, said she was asked to remove her mask. She was actually told that it wasn't protective for her.
Yeah.
And the nurse said to her, my daughter is non-verbal in these situations, but the nurse said, well, that will only protect people from you rather than protect you. And she's thinking to herself, well, if you know that, if you think that, why aren't you wearing one to protect me?
Exactly. It's extraordinary the numbers of people who have who are clinically at high risk, know they are, maybe have even gone into hospital to see their consultant, and their consultant isn't wearing a mask and is basically saying, oh, you don't need to wear a mask anymore. And it's in some cases it feels like harassment, and that's where I'm even starting to think, hate crime law might start to come into play. I have no idea. I need to find out more about it. But, people are being pressured not to wear masks. I'm somebody who uses social care support. But if I have somebody coming in, say, from a local authority, if I were to have that person come in to provide me with essential support, I have no power to make them wear a mask to keep me safe, even within my own home. So, what does that tell you about human rights, about your right to life, about human rights? Is there an angle there for legislation? So there are kind of all manner of tools here. They're not always easy to use, but they are there, and we have to find ways to use them. And it is about, as I said earlier, I think it's about building a movement. If enough people start making a fuss, ultimately the politicians and everyone else have to listen. They have to. But we've a long way to go.
That point you made about social care and people coming into your house and you can't even make yourself feel safe at home because you need to have people come in. It's something that I would imagine a lot of people who aren't in that situation, it never crosses their mind that would happen. No. And it's like you said before, isn't it? We need to be talking to each other. We need to understand each other. And we need to make people see. You see, the thing is, with that thread I wrote, the vast majority of people were like, this is wrong. That is so wrong. And I don't suppose they were all as involved with COVID as I am, or yourself, but people who are not involved can see when something's not right.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to keep talking. And that's why I'm really, I really think it's valuable that someone in your position, you're relatively well known in Scotland, with, amongst the government, for example. And, so you speaking out is something I'll always be grateful for people that did. And I'm glad that you're doing that. And to that end, I want to look at like this idea that you've got. How can others help? What do you need? Is there something that
Yeah.
that we can do?
There is, and there certainly will be. As I said, I'm still at the relatively early stages of setting things up. But basically, what I will be needing, I'm going to need people with different sorts of perspectives to get involved. It is about and people with different experiences of exclusion most of all, and it is about setting up projects and asking people what their priorities are too. So what do you think are the absolute top priorities? Where do you think co-production with a variety of different people is really going to be helpful to developing good practice, or also better products? You know, what are the things that are stopping that? Can we make products more effective? You know, can we, or attractive, or usable? It's about particular areas of expertise. I've already mentioned a few, but you know, it would be great to have input and access to people with kind of IT and tech type experiences. Scientists of different types. I've got contacts with some, but you know, it is about across the world as well. Legal, I've mentioned, and research. There's so much that requires academic, you know, in-depth research, and also manufacturing and production, because it's not my area, but I do think, you know, how can we make masks that fit and fit well, or is it not getting not being able to do fit tests easily an issue? Well, how could that be resolved? It's about how can we make HEPA filters look great so they become part of some sort of fashionable interior decor statement. You know, how can we make people want and make it easy? But I don't know anything about that, the manufacturing production side. I would really like to understand, you know, much more about that. I think what a lot of people, you know, I think there may be people from other countries here today. There's so much happening in different places of innovation, and different examples of good practice and bad across the world. And I did a bit of looking into that a while ago for a parliamentary committee in Cayman. It was brilliant what was going on, you know, in different countries that I knew nothing about. And every so often you see that on Twitter. You know, how can we collate this, pull this together? So sharing of innovation and good practice so that we can showcase it, because it's about showing people that it can be done and it is being done, and normalizing it. Yeah, I really want to hear people's ideas, questions, you know, and what problems need to be solved. How can we solve them? It's about dialogue. It will be about volunteers. It'd be great, for example, to collate some really, you know, the key things we've learned or found out, or good practice that we found out that week, and maybe do a Twitter thread on it, for example. And of course, it is about money. These things always are. I mean, I'm clearly not doing this for the money. And if I was interested in making money, I'd probably had a rather different career. But yeah, it's about, you know, can we offer training, consultancy? Can we get some research grants in? You know. And possibilities of affiliate marketing. So there's a whole load of possibilities here. In fact, my problem at the moment is I've got far too many ideas, and I need to kind of try and whittle this down into something that's kind of can be done and is really tightly focused. But that's, at this stage, I think hopefully that's gives people a bit of a sense of what could be good, and what could be useful, and how people might get involved. Does that help?
Yeah. So Sally, do you want people to approach you on Twitter, or do you want, you know, how would people contact you?
Yeah, I mean, certainly through social media.